Prepare for takeoff, please.
It's the Shipping Pod. Season 2. Hello and welcome to the Shipping Pod. I'm your host, Tim Dooner. Thank you for coming back. I know it's been a hot minute since our last episode, guys, and today I'm here to tell you why. I have some good news and I have some bad news. I'll give you the bad news first. The Shipping Pod is going on hiatus. And the reason why is the good news. I've been tabbed to produce and host another logistics podcast called Consulting Logistics, presented by Aborn and Company. Now, Aborn and Company, you may remember Jill Carney. She was a guest on here a couple episodes ago. They're a company that I trust very well. I've worked with as a consultant on the marketing side, doing social media, blogging, etc. for them. So after we had our episode on the Shipping Pod, I stayed in discussions with them, and they really wanted to develop their own podcast and have something under their umbrella. This was an opportunity that I was happy to jump on. However, doing two logistics podcasts at the same time, a little bit much, especially since I envision Consulting Logistics to be pretty similar to what we already do here on the Shipping Pod. You can find Consulting Logistics at abornandcompany.podbean.com or at abornandco.com/blog, or just click on their blog there. It's a brand new show. We've already put out 2 episodes. And once I'm done speaking here, I'm going to include one of those episodes with the podcast. I had a great discussion on contract season with the lovely Rich Bulman from BOC International. In addition, I've also been busy with Snack Masters Incorporated. That's an outlet for me to take some of the banter that I would do at the beginning of these Shipping Pod episodes and give them their own place to live and thrive. Snack Masters Inc. is fast snacks, fast food, fast reviews, a podcast served to you in 30 minutes or less. That's available at snackmastersinc.com, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, everywhere podcasts are heard around the world. Consulting Logistics, presented by Aborn and Company. Also on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and soon to be Spotify. This will be a monthly show where we talk to thought leaders throughout the logistics and supply chain industry, covering many of the topics near and dear to my heart and my listeners' hearts. I hope you all join me over there at Consulting Logistics, presented by Aborn and Company. And thank you guys for coming along with me on this journey. It's been a crazy year. It's been a great time, and I've loved hearing from all of my listeners. Without further ado, here is our most recent episode of Consulting Logistics, presented by Aborn and Company. Enjoy the show, and I'll see you on the flip side. You are listening to Consulting Logistics, presented by Aborn and Company. I'm Tim Dooner, here with Global Business Development Manager at BOC International. It's Rich Bulman. Rich, happy to have you in studio today.
Thanks so much for having me, Tim. It's a pleasure to be here.
Rich, tell us a little bit about BOC International.
Well, BOC is a privately held 3PL headquartered in South Boston. It's actually an interesting story. It's owned by 2 gentlemen who jumped out from a large multinational years ago. The multinational that they were working for got sold to a different company. They didn't like the direction that it was moving in, and they literally moved out into the parking lot into an ocean container to start.
Oh, wow.
So they started cutting bills of lading out of the parking lot and doing sales, and 25 years later, we're in Chicago, Houston, Boston. We have an office in New Hampshire for doing fireworks and munitions. And we have an office in Cali, Colombia, Shenzhen in China, and a small sales office in New York at this point.
So that's like method working, like literally being inside of the container. Some people do method acting where they stay in character the whole time. I imagine being in the container really brings it home. The only way you could get any more immersed is if you were actually on the steamship filing entries.
Right. Right. And the funny part about the story is they had no money when they started out. So they actually had one car between, there were 5 guys involved in the beginning. 3 of them have since retired, but they had one car between 5 guys that they split for sales, and then they'd all come back in and do the bills and leading in the evening. So it was really a shoestring operation to start, but they've had some fantastic success and some really innovative ideas to bring to the market. I mean, customer service wise, their mantra is that we're going to be remarkable. If you do business with us, you're going to walk away feeling like you were cared about, your needs were taken care of, and we understand your business.
You guys are based in an area in South Boston that's just exploded. When did BOC start?
BOC came around in 1993.
Much different seaport area in Boston back then.
Absolutely. Yeah, now you look at the seaport and it's a shining jewel of Boston.
You've been with BOC for, I believe it's 9 years now, correct?
That's correct. Yep.
So as BOC has grown, and as you have grown with the company, everything around you is literally going up and growing too.
Oh, exactly. We went from having really 2 lunch options to having some of the best restaurants in the city, move in next to us. And it's really been quite a transformation. Even our building is entirely new windows, new elevators, it went from looking like an old army barracks, which it is, to looking like a really Class A office space type building. And of course, the trick for us is controlling costs. There's a lot of cost control that goes into it, but we were fortunate enough to be a long-time South Boston resident, have some really good connections in the seaport, and we were in ahead of the curve there. So.
Sure. That sounds ominous. You got good connections down in Southie. So, Rich, 9 years. How did you get into the business? How did you end up with BOC? Why are you sitting here now? Let's let our audience, let's inform them a little bit about who you are. I think that if you're close enough to this industry in the New England area and you've gone to things like Connect, there's a good chance they've run into you. But in case you haven't,
right?
Who's Rich Bulman?
So I started in this industry in 1989. I was a graduate of UMass Amherst, and I applied for a training program with Maersk Line. And I went with Maersk Line down in the New York, New Jersey area for a 16-month training. After that, I went to Baltimore to work on Dundalk Terminal for them. And one day I woke up, I was in the trucking outfit for Maersk, and I wasn't particularly pleased with what I was doing. So I decided I was coming back to Boston, came back to Boston and went to work for CMA when they had a direct line call here. And that was a fairly short-lived thing. But then I went to work for K-Line and then Mitsui, and that lasted another 12 years on the line side. So in total, I was on the line side for 17 years. And then I made the switch over to freight forwarding. I went to work for a large multinational freight forwarder as their ocean product manager. So I was responsible for import and export. And then Patrick and Brian came to me and with an offer at BOC, and I knew them well personally, and I knew that they ran a good business, and I knew it was a great opportunity. So here I sit 9 years later having more success than I ever thought I'd have. So
there's those connections. An offer I couldn't refuse.
Exactly, yes.
Is the grass greener? So you've been on the line side, now you're on the broker, NVO side. Is there any difference between the two? Because I know that when I was on the NVO side, you always have those days when you're down and you look at the guys on the line side and you're like, geez, maybe it'd be easier if I was just on the line. Is there no easy path? Is one better than the other? Have you enjoyed one more than the other?
I think it's interesting. I think I enjoy the NVOCC side much more. The advantage to being on the line side, I think it's a lot easier to get appointments and get people's attention because, let's face it, there's not a lot of asset-based carriers left out there. Whereas freight forwarders, there's more than you can shake off in a day. Most people are chasing away phone calls. So in terms of getting appointments, it's easier from the line side. In terms of the actual quality of the appointment, I feel like there's a different relationship with an NVOCC 3PL type thing than there is with the carrier. Carrier relationship was always strained. It was always, I liken it to a car deal where people would walk in. It was very adversarial, and I have to check with my manager and get back to you. And it wasn't quite the open book that you get with a 3PL type sell. I think a 3PL is more consultative, and people will open up to you with what their issues are, what their challenges are. And in fact, that's usually where I start with people in businesses. What's right now the biggest nightmare you're facing, and how can I fix it? And oftentimes that's the thing that people will open up on first.
A lot of shippers are going to approach NVOCC's steamship lines, companies like BOC International and companies like Maersk this time of year. Because we're entering into contract season, right? As sure as you file your taxes in April, there are people putting together proposals for contract season. I definitely want to touch on that, but before we do, can you tell us a little bit about the difference between a spot rate and a contract rate? what contract season is, how we get into it. Because in your basics, if you don't have a contract, you deal with a spot rate market. What is a spot rate?
So a spot rate is actually whatever the market will bear at that time. This business, and I'll speak to more to Trans-Pacific. Every lane is a little bit different, but Trans-Pacific is probably the main lane that we deal with here in the U.S., so I'll speak to that one in particular. It's always been a May 1 to May 1 contract for the carriers. And really the unofficial kickoff is where I was last week at TPM, the Trans-Pacific Management Conference in California. And what that is it's a large group of shippers, carriers, NVOCCs, truckers, all get together for an informational seminar. And as part of that, there's all these breakout meetings of starting the contract negotiations, so to speak. So you're right. Everybody has their RFQs ready to fire. I've got 3 or 4 of them right now in my queue that I'm working on. So what ends up happening, spot rate versus contract rate, is obviously if you contract with a carrier and NVO for a fixed rate, we're going to give you that rate throughout the year. You're going to have to guarantee us some sort of volume. And really what the carriers have pushed us towards is more of a steady volume than just a straight volume. It used to be you could just say, I'll give you 200 containers in the year. You can give me 200 containers in the last month of the contract. You can give me 200 containers in the front half of the contract. Lately, what the carriers have figured out is people are using those contracts and the spot rate to play to a rate advantage. They've now done this sort of informal equation where they're dividing the contract minimum quantity commitment by 52, and that's the number of containers they'll guarantee you a week. Simple example would be if you signed a 200 FEU contract now, they're going to look for 5 containers a week to fulfill that.
It's one of those things, right, where not everybody who uses spot rates use contract rates, but everybody who uses contract rates is having to use spot rates at some point. Either lesser traveled lanes, shipments come up, things come up, because the biggest difference between the spot and the contract is I have a shipment right now that has to go to China. I'm paying whatever the market value is, the market can bear. Well, as we've learned in 2018, you could end up spending a substantial amount of money, right, as things like capacity has shifted on both the sea and on the land.
Correct. And what we're seeing, Tim, is really a move from some of the larger BCOs, beneficial cargo owners, some of the, I wouldn't say it's the Walmart level, but large importers are actually holding back on their MQC for the carrier and leaving more out there for the NVO or the spot market to give themselves flexibility, right? So there are certain times where you may not want to sign a contract on May 1. You may think the market is going to dip a little bit and you can get a better contract in July, right? So what we're seeing is people using the NVOCC as sort of a safety net, right? I can count on you for space when I need it, when times get really, really tight. I can use you as I want to kind of bridge a gap to get to a point where I think I can negotiate a better deal. And I can use you, like you said, just on lanes that I may not have enough volume to attract any kind of a rate. And I do have customers that very much use me in that capacity. And it works out as a nice relationship for both of us, you know?
Is there an advantage to one or the other? People who, of the ideologue that being in the spot rate market, there are some people who refuse to get out of it. They really like to gamble and stay in that lane. It's very hard to pry them out of that mentality because I think in their mind, right, the more brokers you can leverage against each other, the cheaper rates you'll get.
I would say there's rate and timing. But to answer your question about is there an advantage, I think it depends on what commodity you're in, what your personality type is, right? Like you said, there's some people who just can't get away from that sort of gambler mentality. There's some commodities that can't get away from it, right? As a food broker, right? You can't let anybody have an advantage. So if you take a chance on signing a contract and you get burned on freight, that could be the difference between profitable, unprofitable, making business and not making business. Some of the retail positions that we deal with are in a different boat. They come to me and they say, you know what? I really want to see a fixed price for my goods so I can go out and I know what my percentage points are in the market and I don't have to worry about whether it moved in July or September affecting my profitability. So I think there's really a whole lot of different cases that people put out there. And that's what's interesting about this entire industry is there's no one size fits all. It depends, you know, on what your situation is, what your company is all about, what your personal level of risk is like. But I think most people have sort of leaned towards maybe a combination of both, contracting for what you can contract for, but also leave yourself a little bit of leverage should things change. If the market shifts, so you can react and take advantage a little bit of the spot market and get some savings. The NVO has played a major role in helping people do that.
One of the reasons I've heard people say they don't enter into contract season, they don't put their freight out for bid, is they don't think they have enough volume. What would you say is probably the minimum amount of volume that someone would need to really get some value out of going into contract?
If you're in that maybe 100 containers or more per year is where you can start to look at fixing some rates. Not to say that there's nothing we can do for somebody smaller than that. It's just the real advantage would be to go from that point up. I think that below that, it's going to be hard for us to get the carrier to show any interest in that freight, right?
Sure.
We can always sort of consolidate your freight with somebody else's and get you a semi-fix, but there's always going to be some variable costs in there. So I'd say 100 FEUs and up.
So contract season, you mentioned it, the big thing. You're putting together RFPs, RFQs. On your end of the business, what do you guys need to know to put together contracts for shippers? And what do you kind of wish shippers knew that you needed? What is, when you're guiding people through putting together these proposals to get them the best deal possible? So then maybe we can go into some of the tricks or some of the ways that customers don't think that they can save money, but they should be doing.
Forecasting is probably number one. It's always easier for us after we've handled a piece of business to look historically at how the business flows, when it flows, what type of service they need. Can they live with a 40-day transit time? Do they need a 31-day transit time? Is there flexibility in ways that we can move the cargo, right? And that's really what would drive it the most. I think that when we see cargo flows from people, we can understand that, yes, this commodity has a peak. And this peak either is going to coincide with the traditional peak season for goods that are coming in with Christmas, which is not a great advantage for us, but at least we know to negotiate for space on that point. Or maybe it's a commodity that has a different peak and is coming in for springtime. So it would have a peak of cargo when the carriers are looking for the cargo most. And that we can use as our rate advantage, So it gives us a good idea, understanding your business, when it moves, how it moves. And some of that is just providing your outlays of how your cargo moved in the past years. Obviously, businesses change, but most of the time there's a flow to it that stays fairly constant.
Sure. When I was on the sales side, I remember that a lot of customers would get locked into one single line item instead of often looking at the totality of costs. Because one of the things that we can leverage on the NVO side are some things that customers don't immediately ask for. Accessorials, bunker charges, surcharges, what happens at the ports, who's handling this, dock overtimes. There's a number of other costs that come into moving a shipment other than just the cost of the bill of lading or to get it on the steamship. What are some areas that shippers should be focusing on in those discussions and they should really bring to the table and stress to their broker that they would like to see some relief from, or they would really like worked into the final price?
I think one of the things that has become a big issue in the last couple of years is container free time and chassis. That's really become one of the things that the carriers have walked away from in terms of supplying a chassis and supplying adequate free time to move the container to your dock and get it back. One of the things that we always negotiate into our contracts is extended periods of those. Obviously, the chassis, there's a real cost for it, and that's something that we do pass along to customers, but we can negotiate a better deal than you can get directly with the steamship line for a chassis because of our volume and putting together deals with different truckers and et cetera. So that's one. And I think that one of the things that people don't realize when they think about going direct with the line as opposed to going with an NVOCC is how much work is involved. The steamship line customer service has, I would say, deteriorated in the last 15 years. They went from having offices in every city to service every port down to regional centers. And now we're seeing these worldwide centers, and sometimes they're offshore. Dealing with the steamship line directly, at least from our perspective, has gotten to be a much more challenging piece of the business. The steamship line will not give you credit terms in most cases unless you're a larger importer. The NVOCC, oftentimes, if you've got a good credit history, will extend credit, will pay the bills on your behalf. We take care of really making the cargo flow easily, as opposed to having to have an entire staff that manages that process.
When there's changes, whenever there's rate changes, it in some sense it creates an opportunity, but to existing customers, they want to know why. A communication key, how do you usually handle something like that, especially going into contract season? That's got to be a little nerve-wracking.
Yes, and oftentimes, you'll get notification from the market, from the carriers that's saying that they're pushing through a GRI that's, $300 per container. And it's interesting, we face that on the rate side and on the service side. I think that people don't often understand when things go wrong service-wise, what happened? How could that happen? Why would my container get pushed to the back? And one of the things that we've come up with that I think is innovative for us is we run about 5 port tours a summer where we bring our customers out, clients and potential clients. So anybody who's interested, please contact me.
How would they go about doing that?
rich.bulman@bocintl.com. So you can send me an email. I'd be happy to set something up. But we run these port tours just so that people understand how the business works, how cargo flows, because if you're a small importer, you're maybe thinking that your container is the most important, but when you get down and you look at the terminal operation and you look at the size and scale of that and how things flow in the port, you start to understand that oftentimes it's not just that your container is coming off a ship today and you're going to be able to grab it. It may be in a closed area. It may be in a stack that's inaccessible for the day. And seeing it actually helps our customers a lot of time to really understand when things go bad, that we're not, number one, lying to them, and number two, that we have the connections to get it done, because we really do work closely with a lot of the ports and a lot of the port people throughout the country to try to have the best relationship in place.
What is it like entering contract season in 2018? Near the end of last year, we had the hurricane issues that then dovetailed into the ELD mandate, that then dovetailed into peak season, heading into Chinese New Year. Caused a lot of rate escalation, a lot of capacity issues, especially with trucking. Is that following its way into the 2018 contract season? Are rates expected to be up? What are you guys facing right now?
The initial read we're getting from the market is that ocean rates, and speaking only to ocean rates, will be slight up. And by slight, I mean maybe 100 or 2 up over last year's contract levels. We did see on the spot market some surprising jumps around CNY. There wasn't as much cargo jumping overboard on the ships as there has been in years past, but the carriers had some pretty good resolve to get the rates that they wanted. That being said, we did see a big market dive directly after CNY, so how strong that resolve is a little bit questionable at this point. I think the big things for this year, though, are, you hit on it directly with the LD. The entire trucking situation is so unknown that the carriers have come to us, and they're either, in the case of CMA, putting a $300 surcharge on a service contract that has any kind of an inland piece to it. So they're going to charge an additional $300 right off the bat. Or, carriers that we're negotiating with on some of these RFQs have told us point blank that they're adding a percentage to protect themselves, and that we'd probably do better to look at the market directly for ourselves. So I think that's going to be a major issue this year in terms of cost. We will see a slight increase, as I said, on the ocean freight side, but I think the big unknown is going to be trucking, and I think it's going to be quite a volatile market for years to come.
It's been tough, and I've had a few people say to me in regards to ELDs, well, it's not really changing any laws. What is it changing? The reason that the government pushed through an EL mandate is obviously because people weren't keeping the best records of what their drivers were doing. Because what the ELD mandate changes, if you're not familiar, is when you turn the key in the morning, your 14 hours starts and it never stops for the rest of the day. So before, when you were doing paper logging, if you were stuck at a port for too long, you stopped at a rest stop, you may not log that. Congestion happens, you may not log that. Now, they really only have that 14-hour window to operate. So not having cargo ready, sitting at docks for too long, those are going to increase rates. And what we're hearing is trucking carriers really going to drop the hammer on it this year and moving forward because of just a necessity for themselves to stay profitable and to survive. How do you see that translating into rates? So you mentioned the ocean side kind of stabilized. In contract season, how is it dealing with your trucking partners and working with that component?
Well, it's interesting. I actually just got back from a couple of trips. One, I was out in California, which is really the the hardest hit area on this. Actually, there's 2 hardest hit areas. I would say the Southeast, Charleston and Savannah ports are very difficult in terms of trucking right now. And obviously the LA Long Beach area is hard hit. So one of the purposes of my trip was to go out and talk to our trucking partners, find out from them what they were expecting, what they were seeing, how we can better forecast our business to them to try to make sure that they can meet our needs. And it's interesting, wherever I went, there were driver wanted signs up, in the trucking companies, and help wanted signs in the transloader facilities. And I think we're really all going to feel the impact of a labor shortage in that industry. And that's the biggest part that the ELDs did, is it took drivers out of the pool. I won't say cheating, but maybe there was some reasonableness to, they could drive across the street to, finish the delivery that they now can't do. And now they're sitting for another 8 hours or whatever. The feeling was there's definitely going to be upward pressure in terms of putting a percentage on it. The percentage I heard as a guesstimate was somewhere between 20 and 25% up. But I think most interesting was in my meetings with these truckers, I met with a VP of driver recruitment and retention. And that was not a person I ever would have met with in a business environment before. In fact, I really didn't know that position existed until now. It's all of a sudden come to the forefront, because that's going to be their big challenge this year, is finding drivers and keeping the drivers that they have.
Even without all the sort of issues surrounding it with automation, they're aggressively pushing automation towards trucks. It's just a matter of time. So if you're 22 years old, it's a tough sell. Like, do you really want to be on the road working 14 hours a day, sleeping in rest stops, being away for months at a time, pulling loads where you can't start a family? The pay isn't that high. Mm-hmm. And, we're seeing the attrition in there because a majority of the workers in there are nearing retirement age or above 55.
Right.
So it's tough to get a youth market into something where that there's a robot literally in line to take your job, and they're trying to get it. They're already testing the trucks on the road.
Right. It's always been a difficult industry, and I think one of the most fascinating points of my career was when I was with Maersk Line. They made us do 2 weeks riding with a trucker doing container pickups and deliveries, and you really saw how hard these guys worked and how much they got kicked around when they went into the terminals, and how much that they got no respect. Really, it was whenever I ran a staff after that, I'd always sort of explain to them that that fax that you're waiting to send. Somebody is sitting there trying to run his truck and feed his family, and he's not able to move because you haven't got off your butt to send that fax down to the terminal. So please take care of him, But in terms of going forward with the automation, I mean, that's obviously took a big setback this week with the Uber accident, but we'll see where it goes. But there is a lot of speculation that we're going to see driverless trucks very shortly. I was at a seminar down in North Carolina. They were talking about the first piece we may see is what they called coupling, where the 2 tractors and 2 trailers and the front truck actually controlled the back tractor. And then what they would do is they could stop in a rest area and decouple and put a separate driver in the second truck. But they weren't connected by wires. They weren't physically connected. It was a Wi-Fi connection type of deal where the front driver actually drove both tractors.
Wow.
So that was supposed to be the beginning of what we'd see. And to me, it's a little bit scary to think about a truck operating without somebody behind the wheel.
Yeah, I mean, I still get nervous whenever, and I think it's just I see too many videos on the internet, but I get, it's always a truck hitting one of these big tractor trailers. And it's weird because it's a bit counterintuitive. Human drivers probably do cause more accidents than robotic drivers will. But there's such a stigma and it's such a new thing to robotic drivers that one pedestrian accident, obviously huge tragedy. 16 people run over a day by regular cars. But the public perception of that and although I still think it's going to happen quicker than you think because there's so much money. Uber is kind of betting their life on this. They want to get away from paying humans for moving cars around. Tesla has really talked about some of their strategy. They got their hands in so many pots, but one of them is their electric truck, not just coupling, but they want to do convoying. It's going to be a fascinating change, but that stuff's not here yet. I don't know. It's going to be funny though. 5 years from now, completely different conversation. We'll be.
I think you're right. I think, and like you said, I mean, a lot of the labor force aged out. A lot of trucks we lost on this ELD thing because, face it, if you were in your 50s and you had an older unit that wasn't worth or couldn't be upgraded to handle electronic logs, it's a great time to get out and seek something else. You lost a lot of drivers and you lost a lot of units to that law, and it's going to continue to be an issue.
It took so long for tech to really come into our industry. We were untouched for so long, and if people, especially kids coming out of college, they look at some of the systems that are still used, customs running on DOS systems to do entries, which most of these kids probably never even touched DOS unless they went to like a computer history class. Not a lot of Windows-based, and even a lot of companies are getting better now, but a lot of like the search functions were 10, 15-year-old technology. How important during contract season is reporting capabilities, is technology to the importers that you're speaking with?
Oh, it's huge.
Yeah.
I mean, it's become very much a part of the service that we offer is being able to offer end-to-end visibility to give you the earliest possible look when a shipment becomes a shipment, or even at some points before that, when an order goes out there, to track the order through from order status to shipment. People absolutely are dying for information. And part of that is, they can react better. Issues are going to happen in this industry. There's man, weather, and machine, and any one of them could break down at any time. But if you're passing along that information quickly, it gives companies more of a time to react and maybe get the cargo that was so important on that shipment onto an air freight shipment, or to realize in their system where they may have it to get it trucked in from another DC. So it's really, information has become king. And that said, we're starting to see from the carrier world where they're starting to look at information. I mean, Maersk is now working in a huge deal with IBM, working on a blockchain technology solution for transportation.
People hear about blockchain. They don't hear it as blockchain. They hear about like Bitcoin, for example. Bitcoin runs on blockchain technology. It's a type of technology that multiple parties are allowed to edit and put different data points in and command points at certain times. With the ransomware attacks, a big setback to that. Where's blockchain at right now with BOC, or when you're going to these conferences?
My understanding, and I'm certainly not a blockchain expert, but my understanding is that this deal with Maersk and IBM is the beginning of that process in our industry. And one of the concerns with that alliance is Maersk is supposedly 51% owner of this joint company. And what they need to bring is a standardization to the industry. So everybody needs to be operating on the same standard to fill in those blocks as the shipment moves through. And there's some belief that Maersk, being not such a neutral party, may not be the right one to administer that through the industry, because there may be a lack of trust on where does that data end up? So I think we'll see some competition, and I think maybe, within the next couple of years, we'll see some real movement towards better information flow in the industry.
I think we'll have to, because, you can't throw a rock without hitting a broker around here. I don't want to say there's too many of them, but as I mentioned a little bit earlier, is that technology is really starting to move into our industry. Importers are starting to get a focus on it. So I think in the next 5 years, you're going to see a lot of broker attrition, which the ones that don't catch up, they're not going to be around much longer. They're either going to get consolidated, or they're not going to have the book of business to stay in business. Because in your end, there's only so many things you can control with rate, and you can't control capacity at all. But what companies like BOC can do is invest in the best technology, the best customer service, the best people.
That's exactly right. Yeah, we actually just made a major purchase of a brand new software to bring us much more up to date than we were before. Our people are obviously our largest asset. As my owner likes to say, we don't own anything. We're non-asset based. We don't own ships. Customer service and people are really where we live. And if we're not doing a job better than somebody else, then we're going to cease to exist. So you're right. I think there will be some consolidation in this industry. I think we've already seen it, the beginnings of it. You've seen a lot of mergers and acquisitions. And I think, the problem with this industry is that it is overpopulated. As I said before, it's not huge markups. It's not like we're all out here making millions. It's a pretty tight margin market. How many people can afford to keep up with that technology change and to really train their people in the way they need to be trained in order to keep up with the changes that happen in this industry? That's going to be the big question.
In a tough contract season like this year, rates could be up on the ocean, rates could be up on the land side. Is a shipper better off staying in the spot rate market in hopes that these rates depress and come down? Or are they better off negotiating now in fear that they're going to go up? When is the best time to enter into contract?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, for us, the timing on if you're looking at an NBOCC contract, we actually will know our true costs around the beginning of May. A lot of people come and ask us to quote before that, and we're guessing at what we're going to get. I hate to say that, but I say we're guessing. We're putting that on an educated guess based on what the beneficial cargo owner market is doing, right?
Yeah.
We don't really know. The real market is set by, the Walmarts, the Home Depots of the world, right? That's sort of your A class. Then they start to get into the B class, BCO. And then once they hit the C class, they start negotiating with the larger freight forwarders at that point. So that's really when we start to see what they're going to offer us in the marketplace. And to answer your question, I would say, ideal time for us to respond is probably mid-May to an RFQ. That's when we really know what our costs are going to be, what clauses we have, what advantages we can bring in the market. Certainly open to do anything before that, but that's really the time frame that we will best understand what our costs are, which allows us to pass along the best possible rate. In terms of spot market versus contract, it's a really tough call. I mean, spot market right now is as low as I've ever seen it. And I have to believe that contracting at this point would be a good idea. Is that to say that it's not going to drop further? No, I never thought it would get this low.
But that's on the ocean side, right? When you're talking trucking, it's a completely different animal, because the capacity issues have really all been pushed onto that side.
Yeah, I mean, we're really going to face three major factors this year in terms of increases, right? And it's the trucking side that we talked about. The ocean side, we have less carriers in the market. There's a little bit more carrier resolve, I would say. So we may see some upward pressure from that. And then there's a third factor, which is the bunker. There's a new initiative out that all of the steamships have to cut their sulfur emissions from 0.5% to 3.5%. So that means they're going to have to purchase more and more of the low sulfur fuel, which is more expensive, and it will drive the cost up for the carriers. So we're looking at that as a quarterly adjustment right now, and I think that's going to go nowhere but up.
It's been about a year since Hanjin went bankrupt. What have you noticed since then? Has service levels gone down between the carriers? Have these new carrier alliance picked up the slack? What's life like a year later without Hanjin?
Well, the Hanjin bankruptcy really accelerated a trend in the industry that was already well underway. I think, what we've seen is carrier consolidation for the past 20 years that's really been unprecedented. I know when I started in this industry in 1989, there were 32 what you call global carriers, and they all served their own markets and they all did their own thing. Then what we did was probably, year-wise, it was probably right around the year 2000. We started to get into these vessel sharing agreements. So all of a sudden you went from 32 distinct services to, maybe 14 alliances of carriers that were sharing vessels and et cetera. The market today has really accelerated that to the point where we're now down to at the end of this month, we'll be down to 9 major global carriers. So from 32 to 9 is a pretty big cut. And what makes that a little bit scarier is the carriers, as you guys all know, enjoy antitrust immunity. So while they can't talk directly to rate, they can talk to market direction, they can talk to capacity issues and that kind of thing. So they can very much have conversations with each other about the market. And it's a whole lot easier to control 9 global carriers are sitting around a table than it is 32. So
they actually got raided. They got raided about a year ago.
Yeah.
Did anything ever happen from that? I remember reading the news articles. Then it's kind of been crickets ever since.
I think it went very silent on that. I don't know if there were subpoenas served at the Box Club raid, and I don't know what the outcome was. Tim, I'll have to look and see.
Yeah,
it was an interesting time. Yeah,
it was.
So they have been accused of collusion in the past, and to some extent, it's interesting because people get very, very upset when they hear about that antitrust immunity, and they wonder why. Number one, I don't think that antitrust immunity has helped the carriers, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I think the carrier mentality has been, someone else has a lower rate, I better chase that down because we all are supposed to share the same rates and be in the same market. So they really haven't done themselves any favors in that respect with the antitrust. I mean, it does give them a license to steal. I mean, if you thought about any other commodity, if you were a furniture store and you knew you only had 9 other furniture stores around and you could talk to the market for sofas, you'd think you could make a fortune. These guys, unfortunately, aren't all in it for the same reasons. They're not all in it always to make money, to be honest with you. Some are serving national interests. So there's a lot of varied things with the carriers that make it more difficult for them to control the market.
It's harder to negotiate in a system where there's less choices, and that's sort of where this antitrust argument comes up and this vessel sharing agreement. So I guess it gets you answers quicker, though, right? Because there's not as many places to go.
Well, it's certainly a lot easier to look at the number of choices that are available service-wise, right? It's funny because I again harken back to my MERS training program. We all had to do white papers on all the carriers that were in the market. So we had to write 32 papers on strengths and weaknesses of the carriers out there and review their allocations. I wish I could go through that program today instead of when I did. But, in terms of the alliances now, yeah, so we're down to 3 major ones. Each of them probably have somewhere between 12 and 14 loops, I'd estimate. And there was talk at TPM that there may actually be some further changes and further consolidation in terms of the alliances. The Japanese 3 carriers that served a new company called Ocean Network Express, it's going to be called. The gentleman who's the CFO from them was sort of hedging the bets that we would see some major changes in alliances again in the next 2 years. So that may mean further consolidation. I think there's a couple of carriers out there that are on the weaker side and maybe can't keep up with the economies of scale that the other carriers bring. So,
you ever see the prophetic movie Demolition Man, where in the future every restaurant is consolidated to a Taco Bell? Like pretty soon everybody's going to be moving their freight on. There'll be one universal carrier, Taco Bell. All of your media will be through ABC Disney.
Yes,
and
yes, we may see that.
We're moving towards that rapidly, and it's really, it's happening right in front of our eyes. And
yes.
we see it on so many facets around us. It's going to be such a different world. So we've covered contract season a bit. What is the one piece of advice you would give to shippers entering contract season this year? What should they be focusing on with their broker? What should they say that they might not say? Other than contact BOC International or Aborn and Co. to let us handle that for you.
I think this year it's going to be very important to know your business. It's going to be important to kind of as much as possible anticipate your needs and give us a clear idea of what you think is going to be the outlook. I understand that businesses have ups and downs and something you may thought come to fruition didn't and vice versa. But as much as you can give us on information to anticipate your business needs, we can do a better job out there. The other thing I would tell people is if you're in the position of negotiating contracts, it's probably not a great time to pound yourself on the chest and say that you're responsible for getting those low rates, because I think that going forward, we're going to see some upticks, and taking credit for it today is going to mean taking responsibility for when the pendulum swings tomorrow. So
that is good advice. Especially if you plan on being with that company for longer than the next 4 months or so.
Exactly. Yeah. Short term, it's a great strategy.
Yeah. This quarter will be good, but when it comes back around, let's look in the crystal ball a little bit. Let's forget about contract season. One of the most immediate things that has happened are these steel tariffs. Where do you see that going? Do you see that sticking? Is it just a leverage point for NAFTA? Is this going to be repealed immediately by whatever administration comes in next? What's going on with steel tariffs? Do you see it affecting your customers?
Right now, I see it affecting my stock portfolio, which I'm not very happy about.
At the conference, at TPM, what was the general reaction? Was it generally negative towards this piece of policy?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I don't think there was any great fandom out there for the direction it was going in. Going to a protectionist environment has not proven to be healthy for the United States. I think the last time we did it, it was the beginning of the Great Depression. So,
next item in the crystal ball. Where do you see blockchain solutions coming in? Do you think 5 years from now they are completely the norm?
I absolutely do. Yeah, I think this industry has survived too long on EDI transaction sets they're not compatible between carriers. There's an awful lot of money in linking up with the carriers and with your customers to make sure that those transaction sets come through smoothly into your system. It's a really inefficient system. So I think that once we get to that foundational point and have a provider that can give us that ability to input, I think we'll all be in much better stead. And the entire industry, quite frankly, will benefit from it.
Where do you see automation? What do you think that automation is going to do to our industry?
Oh, there's absolutely a push already on the custom side to streamline broker entries and get things down to automated. One of our large customers is one of the big, I won't name them, but one of the big hardware providers. We actually handle all of their entries electronically. They're scanned, but the machine is absolutely going through and it's running every single entry, and then a human sort of runs their eye over it and presses the button and off it goes. So we've cut that from a very manual process down to very streamlined. And I see that going forward in a lot of different ways. I mean, the biggest problem in this industry is we face a couple of obstacles to automation. One is the unions on the actual movement of containers. We do actually on the West Coast have a fully automated terminal. The OOCL terminal is fully automated, but the ILWU is not very happy about it. And,
what else is new?
Yeah, well, productivity is very good there, but they don't like to see that. But it's basically what it is it's cranes that are run remotely by guys with joysticks sitting inside a building, and they actually have straddle carriers that run, and they're unmanned. So you have that. The ILA, which is the East Coast Union, has absolutely rejected any kind of automation at the port. They want to stay to where they are today and not lose a job over it. So that piece of business is going to stay very unchanged unless there's some major changes on the union thinking side.
All that video game playing really going to come in handy with a bunch of different jobs.
Maybe you're onto something. Maybe we could just turn it into a giant video game and have the kids lifting the containers off the ship as quick as they can without, we just need a big reset button, I think, in case something goes wrong.
It's in there is actually a market for simulator games. I don't know if you ever played Flight Simulator, but there are people who will get behind Flight Simulator and they'll sit behind their computer for 5 hours flying from Logan to New York. I heard it's really good. I don't know if there'll be many people playing like Crane Simulator. I've always wanted to do the MBTA bus simulator they have, though. That sounds pretty exciting, just to cut loose virtually with the bus system here. Most of the drivers around here, you think that they think that they're in a video game. Yeah.
Combine that with Grand Theft Auto and you're onto something, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, speaking of crazy drivers, too, another thing we heard, you touched on it, there was an Uber vehicle just the other day, Tempe, Arizona, a pedestrian outside of a crosswalk at night. She was crossing the street pushing a bike, gets hit by an autonomous vehicle. We know that in the trucking space, there are autonomous vehicles in California, in Michigan, in Florida being tested out. What do you see happening when autonomous vehicles start becoming a real thing? Because they're really going to be on the road by the end of this year, 2019. I can't imagine much further in 2020 where they'll be going intercoastal, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I have to believe it's going to be limited to main highways to begin. And I have to believe it's probably going to be a separate lane or some sort of, they're not allowed to come out of the far right lane or et cetera. I don't know how all the legislation is going to work, but personally, I find that the proposition a little bit scary from a couple of perspectives. Number one, just what we saw in Tempe, Arizona, with just machines make errors as people make errors, right? And number two, I worry about cyber attacks, right? If it's being fed from a satellite, that's controlling this autonomous truck, who's to say that somebody can't hijack that truck remotely?
Use their own joystick. And guide it as a missile into a
just
crowd.
As we saw with maybe 9/11 with the airplanes, it's just
or as we see now. I mean, terrorism in Munich and in France throughout Europe, a new sort of form. And the United States too, in New York, people have actually just been taking vehicles themselves and driving them to people. What if en masse you could
take over the truck fleet?
Yeah, you could log into XPO's entire fleet of trucks. Yeah. It could cause a lot of damage.
And jumping back to your question about automation and how it will affect this industry, I think that one of the speakers at TPM had a really, really interesting point where he he brought up that all the carriers want to put an app in front of customer service. They want to replace customer service with an application. And go to our website. You can get all the information you need. You can do everything. And it's really not that simple in this industry, because this industry is based on chaos, right? I mean,
Sure.
there's really so much that can go wrong. There's so much that can change through the life of a shipment. There's so many ways that the supply chain is impacted positively and negatively that people need to react to. And I don't think you can build a network that's going to account for all those things like a human could. So I'd never see the human element going out of this. I think it's always going to be one of those things where you have to use your common sense, right? This is always what I tell the people that work for me is, look at the issue. What's the common sense answer, right? You know it. You know what's
Sure.
going on. But, to try to take a computer and replace that common sense, I think is going to be very, very difficult.
Peter Friedman, he always complains about this, but the media barely ever covers our industry.
Right. Well, it is an interesting hidden industry. I mean, it's. I know when I got into it 30 years ago, I can't tell you how many times I had to explain to people what exactly I did for a living.
Yeah.
So we don't get a lot of press, and even when a couple of years ago when the ILWU was doing their slowdowns and the world economy was being impacted by supply chains around the U.S. being slowed down, there was barely any media coverage. So we don't get a lot of play in the media, and it's unfortunate because it is a driving industry for us. And when I think of the steel stuff, I think of, the jobs that it's going to help in the Midwest. And I look at the jobs that it's going to impact in places like California. In Long Beach, there's entire industries that are just set up on receiving import containers and moving that freight through all these, huge distribution centers, all these transload centers, all these trucking outfits. If we get into a trade war, it's going to impact many more thousands of jobs in that arena than it's going to save in the steel industry. So it'll be interesting to watch.
Yeah. Rich, it's been a real joy speaking with you. We've been talking to Rich Bulman of BOC International. Rich, if people want to learn more about BOC International, they want to reach out to you, perhaps they're interested in the port tour, or they're really getting a late start on contract season, where do they go? Who should they get in touch with?
They can contact me. My cell phone is area code 781-291-9979. Again, that's 781-291-9979. Email, as I said, is rich.bulman@bocintl.com. And our website is www.bocintl.com. So any one of those ways you can contact me, and I'd be happy to help.
And you've been listening to Consulting Logistics, presented by Aborn and Company. You can find this episode and all of the rest of our episodes at abornandco.com, ABORNANDCO.com. We're also on YouTube, Aborn and Company, where we have video versions of all of these episodes, as well as on Twitter, @Aborn Company, Instagram, @Aborn Company, and iTunes, @Consulting Logistics. Be sure to rate and subscribe if you enjoyed. And we have a special promo for listeners. Send an email to info@abornandco.com, ABORNANDCO.com. Put Consulting Logistics in the subject line, and we would be happy to give you a complimentary consultation on the future strength of your supply chain. Rich, thank you so much for your time today. It was a joy having you in studio.
Thank you very much for having me. It was my pleasure.
Best of luck with contract season, and best of luck with your crystal ball and your predictions coming true. You had some good ones.
Thank you, sir. My kids' college depend on it.
You've been listening to Consulting Logistics, presented by Aborn and Company. For Rich Bulman, I'm Tim Dooner.